All right, so in the first video lecture, we identified this concept of sales objection, and we also identified common sales objections that ticket sales reps face when they're talking to prospects. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the lesson, I also want us to spend some time talking about specific approaches to overcoming those objections, right? Because that's the title of our unit this week. That's what this lesson is all about, all right, now that we can identify the objection that we're facing, here are some actual approaches to overcoming those objections, right? And hopefully getting to that final phase of the sales process, which is obtaining the sale or closing the sale. So the second video lecture here is just going to focus on identifying these different approaches to overcoming objections, and then I'll also share with you some examples or maybe some guidance for how you might actually apply those to one of the common objections you face. So these are our approaches to overcoming objections, and we'll talk a little bit more about each of them now. All right, this first approach is called the forestall. All right, and this allows the sales reps to address an objection before the prospect even has a chance to bring it up. Okay, so this is just trying to get ahead of the game, literally. So it gives the sales rep an opportunity to kind of predict or gauge what they think might be coming up as an objection, and then it also saves the prospect from actually having to object, right? So the hope is that during that needs analysis phase of the sales process, the sales rep has gathered enough information about this prospect so that they kind of have an idea of what's coming from an objection standpoint, right? So if they are able to identify those things in the needs analysis phase, then they can get out ahead of the objections now. So an example here is maybe a sales rep knows that the prospect is upset about how the team did the year prior. Maybe they usually come to 10 games, but they only came to 5 games, and that's partially due to the fact that the team just wasn't playing well and had a poor record. So a forestall would be them addressing that, right out of the gate, just saying, hey, I know we had a rough season last year. The guys didn't really come through, and it was tough for all of us to watch, but ... And then they would probably lay out some of the changes, right? Some of the new players picked up. Maybe a new coach has been obtained. They would highlight some of the good things, again, prior to the prospect even having a chance to bring this up, right? So the forestall is all about identifying and addressing an objection before it even comes up. All right, this next approach is really kind of twofold. There are two different ways to apply this denial approach. Now, there might be points in conversations with prospects where they might bring up information that is either incorrect or, simply something that's not supported by fact, right? So there are two different ways for the sales rep to address this denial. One is in a direct way, right? So this could be relatively harsh, potentially, if you're just coming out and being direct about how the prospect is wrong. So example scenario I gave here is a prospect states that she knows the team has been charging fans hidden fees. If the sales rep knows this not to be true, they might take a direct approach and come out and simply say, no, that's incorrect. You have the wrong information, right? That would be an example of a direct approach to overcoming that objection. Now, what's maybe a better approach in these situations, if you want to have a continued conversation with the prospect, is more of an indirect denial. So, customer has said something that's incorrect. Now you're going to address it, but in a gentler, calmer way, right? So the example I gave here was a prospect states that she heard the team is moving to a new city. You might, instead of just shooting her down right away, you might just say something like, oh, wow, I hadn't heard that. Hey, where did you hear that? And then maybe have a conversation about, well, that's not necessarily a legitimate news source, and we haven't heard anything like that. So this denial approach, the indirect approach, is probably the more appropriate direction to go with a prospect that you're hoping to have a continued conversation with. But you also want to make sure they have the right information. Okay, another approach to overcoming the objection is simply to postpone the objection, right? So basically, this just means you're going to address that objection at a later time in the conversation, right? So the example scenario I gave here was a prospect says ticket packages are out of their budget early on in the conversation, right? So before you've even had a chance to ask them questions or conduct that needs analysis. You might just say, hey, that's a fair assessment, but I'd really like to talk to you more about some of our other options. And then that's a way for you to sort of postpone that objection, right? Or at least continue the conversation. And then maybe just say, hey, we'll talk numbers later. Right now, I just want to learn more about you and what you like about coming to our games. So that would be an example of postponing the objection. All right, another approach is called the Boomerang Method. So with the Boomerang Method, basically the sales rep takes the objection and flips it, right? They turn it into a reason to buy, right? So here you're actually highlighting what might be of benefit to the prospect within their own objection, right? Let me give you an example scenario so this makes a little more sense. Prospect states that the company just went through a period of downsizing and to buy sports tickets at this time would look bad, right? So here we're talking about a B2B sale, talking with someone at a business who would traditionally be buying tickets, but right now they're saying it's not a good time because the company's downsizing. Well, in order to utilize the Boomerang Method, you might take that objection and flip it around, right? And turn it around. You might say, actually, if there is poor morale, which it sounds like there might be because of downsizing, an occasional night out at a sporting event might be a great way to turn that around, right? That might be a great way for you to reward the employees that are staying at the company, and a way for you to motivate so that things improve, the financial condition of your company improves, right? So that's taking the objection and then kind of flipping it and turning it into a reason that they might actually want to buy. Okay, compensation method is the next approach here. So here basically what you're doing is you're acknowledging that, hey, the prospect has some concerns about the ticket package we put forward, and is probably somehow related to price, right, as we discussed earlier. But in this compensation method approach, the sales rep is going to try to highlight specific products or features, right, in order to sort of object or counterbalance the objection that's been put forward. Again, let me show you an example scenario here. So a prospect is objecting to the cost of premium club seats, right, basically saying it's too much money. So in order to utilize the compensation method, what a sales rep might do is actually show some numbers, right? So they might say, all right, here's the premium club seat that I'm looking to sell you. It's $120 a game. And that includes the seat and unlimited food and beverage to your seat, right? It's a premium club seat. So you might compare that with the mezzanine seat, which is only $70 a game, which the prospect has been purchasing in the past when he comes to games. But then you would want to specify, hey, look, you're paying $70 a game, which, yeah, is less than the premium seat. But look at what you actually spent. We went to your CRM, or your account in our CRM system, and we see that you buy 5 beers a game, and that's $10 a pop. You spend $15 on nachos, and then later in the game you buy another thing of popcorn for $8. Actually, you're spending $143 a game, and this premium club seat would only cost you $120 a game, right? And in theory, you could have even more beers if you wanted. Maybe don't want to go more than 5 beers. That's probably plenty, right? But anyway, in theory, that's what you could say, right? And this is a way of sort of taking the objection that the prospect has thrown at you and highlighting features within the package that you're trying to sell as a way to highlight the value, right? And overcome that objection they've put forward. Okay, another approach to overcoming objections here is the third-party approach, right? So in this case, what the sales rep is trying to do is take referrals they have, right? So existing customers, right? People that they already have a relationship with, and use their experiences as a way to overcome the objection. And they can do that through what we call the feel, felt, found technique. Let me show you that a little bit more about that on the next slide here. Okay, so using the feel, felt, found technique, you first relate to the prospect situation and show that you have a desire to help, right? So you might say something like, I certainly understand how you feel. I think we could actually help you with that issue, right? Felt is the next part. Here you demonstrate how others have felt the same way. This is where that referral piece comes in. So you might say something like, I have a client now who felt the same way. And then you might explain more about their experience. And then found is this last piece. Here you rely on those testimonials and references from others. So let me put it all together for you here. I certainly understand how you feel. I think we could actually help you with that issue. I have a client now who felt the same way, and we have found that business owners who have worked with us to develop ticket programs improve their client sales, right? So you're acknowledging that you understand how the prospect feels. You're explaining how others have felt that way, other clients that you have felt that way. And then you're using actual testimonies or explaining how similar ticket packages have actually helped other businesses or consumers, right? So this feel, felt, found, it's too much for me. Feel, felt, found technique is really useful if you're using this third-party approach. And you don't necessarily have to apply this technique or think deeply about it. Really what you're doing is just saying, hey, I know other clients of mine have been in a similar position as you, and here's XYZ, right? Here's what they did, here's what we did for them, and this is how it worked out, right? People love a testimonial, they love a referral, they love to hear about someone similar to them that's had a similar experience. All right, next approach here is called the educational approach. This one's pretty straightforward, right? The salesperson is going to use research and facts to support the claims that they're making. And if you remember, back to one of our very early discussions, I said it's really important that a salesperson understand their menu of options, right? And all of the information surrounding that, right? Because when they're having these conversations with a prospect, they need to be the expert. They need to be able to answer any questions that come up throughout the conversation, but especially during this overcoming objections phase, right? So here's an example scenario. Prospect states that there is no way he and his wife will be able to use all the tickets in a full season ticket plan. So as a response, if you're using the educational approach, you might actually pull out some data, right? So you might say something like, hey, 70% of our season ticket holders sell their tickets on the secondary market and actually make a profit. Right? That'd be a way to educate the client about how they could actually utilize those tickets that they're not able to use themselves, right? So they can actually make money selling them. Or you might say something like, research has shown that full season ticket purchasers are actually more likely to use their tickets than half season purchasers, right? You get the idea here. You're taking information or statistics about your current season ticket holders and sharing that with a prospect to try to ease their concern or to try to overcome that objection they might have. Okay, so that's a lot, I know, but we covered kind of the gamut in terms of the different approaches to overcoming objections. And I'm going to talk a little bit here in a second, just wrapping up the unit. But before I do that, I just want to say that you're going to get a chance to put all of this together in your practice case for this week on ReggieNet. So not only will you be asked to identify different types of objections, you'll then be asked to come up with various approaches to overcoming those objections and some specific things you might say to a prospect in those scenarios. So your case this week is very much scenario based, and that you'll be looking at, I think it's 6 different scenarios where you'll have to identify the objection and then come up with an approach to overcome it. So hopefully the video lectures this week give you the tools to do that. And really, my hope for this unit is that kind of take away this idea that objections are common and there's nothing wrong with them, right? It's totally normal for a prospect to have objections at some point during the sales process. So just normalizing that is something that's probably going to happen if you're a sales rep. And again, not taking it personally, but trying to use the information you're getting from the prospect to come up with an approach to overcoming it. And just some final things here. Great salespeople don't talk or convince clients into buying, right? Instead, they listen and they meet their needs, right? So it all comes back to this concept of what are their needs, how can we meet them? Back to the very first phase of the sales process that we talked about. And just a couple of other points here regarding overcoming objections. Big thing is just being receptive to the prospect's viewpoint, being able to show empathy, right? Being able to understand where they're coming from when they're talking about the objections and why they're concerned about, actually buying the product. Always asking relevant questions and, again, listening, making sure you're taking in information because that information is going to be invaluable to you when you're trying to overcome those objections. And then, again, trying to be personal and trying to customize, right? So doing everything you can to meet those needs that you've identified and then hopefully tailoring the benefits to meet that particular prospect's needs. And then last thing I'll leave you with here is, probably the overcoming objections phase might be the most uncomfortable part of the sales process, right? If you're a sales rep, because, someone's essentially telling you why they don't or can't purchase your product. So probably the best advice someone can have during this process is be positive yet persistent, right? Maintain positivity throughout that conversation, but also continue to be persistent, right? And look for ways that you can overcome objections and meet the needs of that client. All right, that's all I have for you this week. Again, make sure you're completing the action items in the module. Next week, we're going to cover our last stage of the sales process, which is obtaining commitment. So, we're nearing the end here of the sales process in our video lectures. All right, have a good week.